Hello, everybody. Good morning to some, and good day to others. And for those of you in the UK and Europe, I hope you have a tipple or some tea. I'm Lisa Koenigsberg, and I am the founder and president of Initiatives in Art and Culture. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the first of our 2021 monthly webinars. The series is called All That Glitters, and it looks at the entire spectrum of issues, from mining to the glories of creation, from extraction to cutting, and from significance of material to the significance of object. So we look at challenges all across the spectrum and bring interesting perspectives and voices to bear on the subject. So today, we are going to be talking about effectively what's jewelry and why does it matter. So I'm thrilled to have with me, and I'm going to go clockwise from my left. So upper left is the jeweler and designer John Moore, who is flanked by a couple of his astonishing creations. To my right is Melanie Grant, who writes for 1843 and many other publications, and also has gifted the world her fantastic volume, Coveted, which was published in 2020 by Phaidon, and is a incredibly incisive cross-disciplinary probe into high jewelry. And last is Robert Lee Morris in the smashing blue t-shirt. And
formal.
Robert is, it is very difficult to describe Robert because he is a complete and utter sensation. He is a designer and acknowledged leader of the art jewelry movement. And I am so excited about this conversation and delighted to be joined by the three of you. So the way we're going to work this is, and clearly, I hope from my style, you can tell that the goal is going to be to have fluid conversation and have people commenting on what the others say. We do have prepared questions. And at the end of, there will be about an hour, and then we will have questions. Some of you have already sent them in. If you haven't and wish to the right of your screen, there is a place where you can write a question and send it in. Also, I would be remiss in my duties if I did not do the following, and this is because I am a shameless shill for books, and I also believe that no books, no culture, we die. I want to share first, and these are my well-thumbed copies, but this is Robert's book, Robert Lee Morris, The Power of Jewelry. And this is Melanie's book, Coveted. We'll send you info in our follow-up letter, in which John's work appears. So what we're going to do, I'm going to show you some images that were selected by each person so that you have kind of an visual entry into their approach, their thought, their artistry, and vision. And then we will begin the conversation, and we can revert back to an image if somebody wants to, but I thought this was sort of a good way to transition into what will be a very far-ranging conversation. So Hugo, could I ask you, please? Okay, so the images are grouped by individual, obviously, and these are Melanie's. So Hugo, next slide, please. So a Belle Perron on my left and a Cartier. Next one. A Van Cleef and Melanie on the right.
Fabio Cellini.
And next, please. An Andrew Grima and is that Victoire de Castellane?
Yes.
Next, please. Would you like to?
This is when we talk about inspiration, this is one of my favorite inspirations. A very powerful sculpture that I saw when I was a child, which sort of changed my life. We'll get into that later.
Indeed. So isn't it Boccioni?
Yes.
And highly movemented Italian futurism. Next slide, please. Two works by Daniel Brush. One, the brooch in the hand, and the other, the ring below, studded bakelite, which brings up materials. And then to the right, a Vernier.
Yeah.
Next, please. A Hemmerly bracelet and pair of earrings to the, I hope we are the same, to my left, viewer's left, and then a pair of brooches by Wallace Chan to the right. Next, please. Now we are jumping into Robert's head. And these are touchstones of the many stories and adventures about which you'll hear. So this is, there's a series of bracelets like this, and I think they're quite remarkable. Next, please. One of the things you'll hear about is the idea of vocabulary as intellectual capital from Robert. So when you're looking at these, you will see his vocabulary, if you will. Next, please. We were interested in what was important and influential to each of the three. And Robert has enormous admiration for Calder and has mentioned this brooch, which is his piece for Georgia O'Keeffe in particular. And on the right is a Cycladic figure, and also an important inspiration for him. Next. A gobsmacker, a knockout. Next, please. Another example of bold vision. Next, please. So this is part of the basic vocabulary, the wrist, and of course the belt. And this is obviously gives you a sense of what it's like on a human. Next, please. I just could not resist the architectonics and the varied ways of putting pieces together. Next, please. I believe this is a hair ornament.
No, it's an arm piece.
Is it?
Yes, it goes on the upper arm, and the tapered spikes go upward.
Smashing.
Deadly.
Absolutely. Extraordinary. And sorry, I didn't get that. Next, please. Okay, this is an extraordinary breastplate. So it's dazzling golden. Next, please. It's another neck piece, and again calls to mind this issue of vocabulary. Next, please. John Moore. I had the extraordinary privilege of meeting John 2 years ago at the Goldsmiths Fair. Although I had seen his work in prior years, but had not met him. And his creations are quite a tour de force, as you will see. Next, please. This is a very recent work called Pagoda. Next. This appears in Melanie's book. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank.
It's part of the Verto series.
Thank you, Verto.
Mm-hmm.
I was inserting an additional syllable. And this picture just allows you to see construction and rhythm. Next, please. So go, John, go, sorry.
I go? Yeah, this one, I made this one specifically for my first video piece, which featured a ballet dancer, and the piece needed to be lightweight at this scale so that she could move around freely. And this is, so this is made of wood with paint and rubber.
Next, please. So this is also the Verto series, and it's obviously polychrome, and it gives you a whole sensation of lift and flight. Next, please. This is go ahead.
There you go. This was, so this was, I'll talk more about this later, but this is a shot taken on the day of shooting the video that I just talked about. And this is me directing the dancer. We discovered that if she shrugged her shoulders, that the piece would sort of close over her head, almost like a Venus flytrap, which is not something I had planned. It just sort of happened on the day.
And next, please.
These are made of glass, and this was the result of a collaboration with a glassblower named James Maskery, and it was a project coordinated by the National Glass Centre in Sunderland.
And next, please.
And this is the lace wing, I call it. It's made of silver, has 48 diamonds in the front, and it changes shape, and it's the piece just behind me here.
Have I worn that one? Is that when we did the conversation? That's, yeah.
Yeah.
It has unbelievable possibility in terms of movement and shape. And finally.
This is a random one, and I will talk more about this later as well, but it's a character called Yorick Bernison from Philip Pullman's book, His Dark Materials. And we'll talk more about inspiration later, but I wanted to refer to books that I've read and characters that have influenced the way I think about wearable objects.
So the idea of effectively showing you this work was both to refresh, and in two ways. One, in the event that perhaps, you know, there was work you hadn't seen, and then also to create a transition into this conversation, since it's not necessarily top of mind to be looking at such extraordinary objects and hearing commentary about them in the middle of the day. So that was the purpose behind showing you that sort of splendid visual display. So now I'm going to jump into some questions, and I'm interested in what each of you thinks, but I'm going to ask Mel first. How do you define jewelry, body adornment, and what makes something jewelry?
I think that's an interesting question, because for me, I would say jewelry is an expression. It can be taste, it can be style, it can be intellect. but it is an individual expression, which means it can be anything, a bit like any kind of art can be anything. So I think we tend to think of jewelry as very precise shapes and with precise functions, but I disagree with that. I think you can buy jewelry and never wear it. I have jewelry that I've never worn, which is like sculpture I look at. And I do think the materials are immaterial. I don't think what it's made of should define what it is. So really, as long as it has been created to be a jewel, I think we can call it jewelry, even if it's never worn.
So is adornment part of it? Or
it can be. It doesn't have to be. And I get into conversations all the time with people who say, but jewelry has a function, so it can't be art. And I say, that's ridiculous. We have given it a function because it suits us, because it's easy. But jewelry has no function. You can assign it a function or not.
Well,
it's
also possible to argue that having a function doesn't make something not art, because think of all that didactic painting, which is so much of what the religious stuff is all about. That definitely has a purpose, and yet it's art. So maybe that's an aspect of the whole discussion that really needs to be profoundly rethought. Like, does function deny something the status as art?
I think we are sometimes looking for reasons to separate jewelry from fine art. And I think that's something which comes along quite conveniently to do that. So yeah, I just think it can be anything as long as you express some kind of emotion.
So Robert, what would you say to that question? How would you define jewelry and body adornment?
Well, jewelry, as far as I'm concerned, it's a part of the primal humanity. It is a primitive, gut-filled need that man has had from the beginning of mankind. The idea of putting something on the body that is not functional, as clothing is, and the need for that piece of that object to be on the body is fascinating, because it's not going to keep you warm. It's not going to do anything except provide a pathway to expression. And it's an expression that's coming either to you or from you outwards. And as an adornment, see that word adorn, that's where we can get into trouble. Is adorn kind of means to a lot of people that it's superfluous, that it's just a fun, pretty thing that you would decorate with. And I don't see jewelry as decoration. I see jewelry as having a power, an inherent spirit, and the level of, I mean, when you look at jewelry throughout the world, I'm always drawn first and foremost to primitive tribal jewelry from all of the different cultures around the world, where that jewelry embodies the cultural norms, the mores, the rules, the personality, and the characteristics, the DNA of that particular culture. And I started off really from an anthropological point of view, that jewelry was something we dug up, and when we found it in archaeological digs, it could actually reveal so much information about that culture. It's magical. And I also think that when you talk about art, jewelry and art, you really have to understand what is art in the first place. And then things fall into place. And to me, art is the expression of the ineffable. That people who are gifted with artistic abilities really have a role to play in society as artists. And Marshall McLuhan was one of my favorite mentors when I was in school, that the artist is the antenna of society. And everyone has a duty to play in society as a sociological concept. And the artist has a job, a duty that he has to do because he's gifted or she's gifted. And that is to be able to reflect back to society the imagery, and the materialization of that ineffable knowledge. It's like the Carl Jung's universal consciousness or unconsciousness or subconsciousness. And that's where jewelry starts to really intrigue me. And it's the reason I got hooked by it.
So I'm going to jump in and ask John, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I agree with everything that Mel and Robert have just said. And like you, Robert, when I first started thinking about jewelry, it was about the ancient cultures and the tribal jewelry. So my sketchbooks at college were filled with pictures of scarification and mutilation, as we would call it in our society. But it really, I think it was really important to try and understand body adornment, or for want of a better word, in the broadest sense, before I sort of figured out what my version of that was. And I think it's really important to also remember that different cultures have different ideas of what's beautiful. Something that we see as normal might be very strange, like lip enhancements or different types of plastic surgery. Whereas we see a lip plate as being uncomfortable in some way because it's not our version of beauty. Anyway, so there's that aspect of it. I think it can just be any object that you decide to put on your body and the meaning that has. And in preparation for this talk, I started reading, going back to old books about tribal jewelry, just to sort of remind myself of what jewelry means in these different parts of the world. And it's so endless, really. And yes, like I said, I think we all, as makers, we all have our own specific thing that we're trying to say. I think one thing I would perhaps slightly disagree with is the sense of duty. Because I think, it's not that I disagree with the sense of duty, but I think the duty primarily is for me to myself to listen to that voice and to act on it. It's almost like if I don't do that, then I'm somehow cutting myself short or falling short of who I really am. So I think the primary duty for me is to honor that and honor myself, and also, this is perhaps getting a bit too far into this, but rather than sort of reflecting the world outside, showing it something new, I think it can do that as well. I think I'll leave it there.
Given your answers to this first question, I'm actually going to jump ahead because I think this question relates very much to another one, which is either how does your jewelry or the jewelry about which you write relate to other forms of artistic expression? And specifically, perhaps fashion for you and dance for you, John. But Melanie, I'm wondering if you, who have made such perceptive comments in your book, might want to be the first to answer that question.
Choosing people to write about is always like an agony, really. I think it's the only thing I understand about what it might be to create something. It's horrific, because you can see beauty in everything. If you're curious and intellectually curious, and so I tend to find sort of things that move me on quite an emotional level, and I'm always looking for people who do something I've never seen before. And both John and Robert have made things which are spectacular, which just feel like completely unique. Like I could just spot them, in a crowd. And it's hard to do when every conceivable thing has been created already. So that, I think, that whisper of uniqueness is something I look for. And somebody doing something that's totally different in the place they're from, that they just feel like they're almost like an alien on Earth. So that's the thing I kind of look for. And I hope that answers the question.
Well, you also, I just want to probe a bit further and then engage John and Robert, but you also have spoken about the relationship of jewelry, if you will, to the creative spirit or artistic movements of its time. So I was wondering, you know, when, for example, you think that that became particularly pronounced, you know, the relationship, if you will, to jewelry, if we are accepting the idea that jewelry is somehow not, if you will, part of the other arts, when did jewelry begin to resonate with artistic movements in a way that's important from your perspective?
I mean, I think jewelry has always been an element. It's been an element in every artistic movement we've ever recorded. The difficulty we have is that because it's sometimes not been considered as art, we haven't necessarily looked at that recording as part of a movement. So say Art Deco, for example, or modernism, which is, I talk about modernism quite a lot in the book, you know, it's an era which expressed itself in jewelry as well as lots of other forms. The tricky thing comes when you have to pin it down, like what is modernism? You know, it's a feeling. Like I look at something of Robert's and I can see modernism. He may see totally different things, but I can see it, I can feel it. So the tricky thing comes, I think this is why books are very important, because they actually sort of factually try and pin down when eras begin, when design does certain things. You know, modernism for me is still happening. We're supposed to be in a postmodernist era, but I think it's still happening. I still see people create very truly modernist pieces. So does that mean the era is over? For me, it isn't, but it is technically over.
Well, the other thing though is that when you're in a postmodern period, if we are, you always retain from that which you departed from. It's the only way that you can, in a sense, be reactive to. So, I mean, I think it's complicated. We are in a I think modernism still is powerful, and at the same time, the quote unquote term postmodern I see, but so much of the vocabulary of it is the vocabulary of modernism subverted in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, and there are echoes, you know, when you have a very powerful movement, it echoes through, you know, the rest of history. You know, you have elements of it. I mean, you could argue now we're on the brink of a big shift in terms of design movements. You know, I think we're about to shift into something new, but we won't really get to know what it is until 20, 30 years down the line. You can only really see in hindsight what you were given artistically as a movement. So, yeah.
So, John, I'm sorry, Robert, you want to say?
What's popping out of my mouth is the fact that the Art Nouveau movement was one of the things that really got me triggered, because when the evolution guy Darwin went to and found all these new species of plants and brought them back to England, suddenly there was a craze for the vegetable theme, and everything from clothing to buildings, architecture, and of course the jewelry became part of the Darwinian thought process. And it just exploded all over the place. And that to me, that's a good example of how the jewelry was reflecting the culture at that time. You know, that's it just is one of the many ways that a movement can show up in so many different areas, like the Bauhaus or Art Nouveau. Everything was part of that same thought. And so that's it for that moment, for that thought.
Bauhaus is interesting because it was only just over a decade long, but it's so powerful that we're still talking about it.
Yeah. No, it influenced me tremendously. And because I was trained when I lived in Japan as a boy in calligraphy, and the whole thick, thin line and the brushstroke was so similar to the beauty of René Lalique's carvings and his jewelry and the all of the architecture, and it swept me up. I couldn't get enough of Art Nouveau, and then it was over, done with it, because it's like too much sugar.
John, I know, sort of shifting a bit, but within the framework of the question, dance and movement are really important to you, and relate strongly to your work. And perhaps you could share that with us. I know, for example, we had one photograph of you, if you will, staging the movement, witnessing the movement, and maybe you want to talk about that and your collaborations.
Well, before I made any jewelry, I was dancing as a kid. Everything goes back to childhood for me, really. And I didn't really understand at the time how these experiences would influence what I would go on to do later on. I just loved moving my body to music. I loved music. I did ballet and tap dancing and modern dancing. And I guess what it did was sort of gave me this understanding of the body in space and movement. And I just feel so much joy when I moved to music. And like as an adult, I didn't become a professional dancer, obviously, and a knee injury kind of forced me to stop. But as an adult, like, you know, going out with my friends and dancing all night has been my sort of release in many ways. So it's kind of difficult to sort of relate. I mean, it seems like an odd pairing, doesn't it? Dance and jewelry. I sort of see the like Mel said, jewelry is an expression and dance is an expression. And for me, there isn't a clear kind of divide or gap between the two. There's kind of this sort of overlap, and with lots of different art forms as well. And whether, you know, the words we use to define dance or jewelry or clothes or all these different things are kind of, they're almost too reductive, whereas actually there's all this nuance of expression of energy. And for me, when I'm dancing, I'm kind of also thinking about these sort of bits of color shooting out of me, and it's just an expression of joy, essentially.
And that's what it looks like.
Make any sense?
Yeah. No, your jewelry looks like it's dancing itself. It is movement. You've captured the essence of, well, I think it's sacred geometry, but it's liquid geometry, which is very much what dance is too.
And so it's obviously very important for me with my pieces that they don't restrict the body. I mean, they will to a degree, because you've got an object on you, so you can't do cartwheels. It would fall off, but that it moves with you, and it kind of as you move, it sort of magnifies your movement. If you think about like Notting Hill Carnival, or I don't know, Rio de Janeiro, and they've got all those huge feather pieces, you know, they might turn from left to right, but like it's this huge movement. Right. So there's real fun to be had in accentuating the movement of the body with an object that extends the boundary beyond the skin, but outwards.
Yeah, I see your work is also sort of metaphorical. Kind of, it is a metaphor for movement. I think Robert captured it beautifully. And I'd like to shift to ask Robert about fashion.
All right, fashion. You know me as a fashion jewelry designer, because I'm not a fine jeweler. I'm not a jeweler. To me, jewelry, the word jewelry means the setting of stones. So I've never really, that's kind of why I use the word artware when I opened my gallery, because it wasn't really it's artist jewelry, yes, because you wear it. It was made to be worn. That's what jewelry is. It's made to be worn. Even if you don't wear it, the intention was that it's either on the body or it moves with the body, and it's, comfortable, and it's part of how you present to the world. When I first started, I ended up following a dream, a vision I had of a post-apocalyptic world. And I was confused as to what kind of artist I was going to be. I'd been a filmmaker for many years, But then as I moved into New York City, it was because I was drawn there by Sculpture to Wear, was selling the jewelry I was making, but I still wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to be. And I was making armor. I was making like what you're wearing right now, Lisa, that Nautilus necklace. That to me it's not really jewelry, even though it's a necklace. I saw that more as part of a vocabulary of a science fiction world. It was like a movie. They were the parts, they were the props to be worn in a movie that was a combination of ancient, tribal, mixed with futuristic technology. And then somehow I was discovered by the fashion editors. Not somehow, I was at the Plaza Hotel. It was a very central location for the fashion world. And New York City being the capital of the fashion world at that time and the publishing world, the fashion designers started coming to me and asking for collaborations. And before I knew it, I was working with Jeffrey Bean and Calvin Klein and all of these, so many major designers, and I was being trained on the job training, so that my work literally became fashion jewelry, even though I didn't intend ever to be in the fashion business. And I didn't even intend ever to have a brand, but because I had such a unique signature to my work and a very recognizable style, I ended up creating a brand, and people knew the brand. And it was just this upward explosion, skyrocketing. My career just skyrocketed because I was working in New York with all the fashion editors, and you really, I still don't see myself so much as a fashion designer or a fashion jewelry designer, but that's kind of how I've been categorized. That the jewelry is to work with the clothing, it's to work with the look. And each designer I worked with, it was my job to give myself to them, to be able to still maintain my signature, but also carry their voice. And so that collaboration is very unique, very beautiful, because it's not about egos anymore. Even though Jeffrey Bean didn't put my name on his program like he promised me he would, because he was a bit egotistical. And yet Donna allowed me to put my name all the time because she loved the collaboration and wanted to promote me every way she could. So that's my fashion background goes all the way back to pre-Brooke Shields and the jeans commercial.
So we have all these sort of thoughts about jewelry, and Robert, you have a fabulous quote, which is that good jewelry raises your frequency every time you look at it. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I say good jewelry, and good meaning positive, that it helps the human condition. And if there's anything that one should do in life, it's to try to help the human condition, even if it's just your own. And I'm all about getting your vibrations raised as fast as possible, especially now more than ever, which is why when I'm on social media, I don't comment on the political situation. I am commenting on my work and presenting my work, because that's how I feel I can contribute to raising the frequency of the mood of people. Get away from that horror of the political situation and stick with that which makes people feel good. And when I say good jewelry, I mean jewelry that when you look at it, you just smile and you go, oh my God, that is so wonderful. And that's my job. I feel like that's what I need to do with my life.
John, thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more with Robert. For me, it's about resonance, and I would say that it's probably different for different people depending on what specific kinds of things they resonate with. But absolutely, if it essentially take you to this place where you feel it's inspiration, isn't it? It's feeling inspired
Right.
by the achievement of somebody else, by something that you see as beautiful. Yeah, but absolutely resonance. It's really important.
What are your greatest influences?
For me, it's kind of lots and lots of things. I feel like I'm a big melting pot, but nature, I always come back to nature ultimately. I try, if anything, not to look too closely at what other artists do, because partly because I don't want my work ever to become derivative of somebody else's, but also because nature is essentially the root of everything. Why not go to the absolute source for your inspiration rather than take inspiration from, I mean, this is me personally, by the way, I'm not trying to tell people how to be or how to create, but I think, yeah, it's really important to go to, you know, as deep as you can go with inspiration. So nature, but also I was very affected by stories that I knew as a child, films that I watched. I loved The Neverending Story when I was a kid, which features this pendant called the Orin, which guides the central character on his kind of mission to save the world, and it protects him. And then, gosh, other influences, music. It's the things that raise my vibration in the way Robert was just talking about. And music is extremely powerful in that sense. In fact, I think it's probably the most, in terms of conjuring that feeling inside me and giving me the inspiration to express through objects, it's music for sure. But then the visual language I use is from nature, if that kind of makes sense.
And Melanie, for shaping your vision and your perspective, what have been the greatest influences on you?
I love sculpture and I love poetry. And I think for me, it's a combination of like museums. It's funny, when you're a kid, you go around museums, you're like, oh, another museum. And as an adult, you just connect with the art. You know, it's almost like a punishment when you're a kid. And I think, you know, it definitely happened to me when I was at the Tate with my mum when I was, I don't know, like 8 or 9. And I saw this sculpture we talked about earlier, and it just knocked me sideways. I'd never seen anything like it. I couldn't move. I just was rooted to the spot. And I've always had this fascination with metal. And I love anything that is metallic. And I think it took me a long time to find jewelry as a source of that. But I knew I had to be next to it. I had to talk about it. And I always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't really start writing until about 7 years ago. And I've always sort of done photography and art direction, and I've been a stylist. So it's been such a pleasure to find another way to express myself in words. And so I love poetry. I love Langston Hughes. There's lots of poets I really enjoy. But I think it's interesting, the idea of inspiration, because having spoken to lots of, you know, very great sort of creators over the years, I find that people who can move past their influences to find a way to find who they are,
right,
tend to be the people we remember. And so the people who who try and twist someone else's vision into something for themselves, it doesn't really work. You have to sort of break yourself down and then see what comes out. And the great minds that I've managed to sort of connect with over the years, I find have shown us an inner world that we, you know, they have this secret world that then they find a way to show us. You know, when I think about Robert's world of sort of futurism and sort of Amazonian women, you know, it's a world I want to visit, you know, and we do visit it with his work. And I think it's a lot about that journey into someone's world. So I think the influences are interesting, but essentially it's who you become post what has affected you as a child, which I find the most interesting.
Mel, you just said what I was trying to say in a much better way. It's like you you can be inspired by an individual, but you're not necessarily trying to be like them or make work that is like them, but it's like you're inspired by what they've achieved.
Right.
So it could be Lady Gaga. You know, I'm not going to make a piece of jewelry based on one of her songs, but I think she's amazing, you know. That's not the best example.
Now, Robert, actually, I'm wondering about, given the incredible richness of your first 18 years, just in terms of where you lived, cultures you experienced, etc., and then sort of subsequent conversations talking about O'Keeffe and cycladic figures, and I'm wondering what are some of the influences that have been most profound for you?
Well, yes, growing up as an Air Force brat, by the time I turned 18, my parents we had as a family moved 23 times. I grew up in Japan and went to high school in Rio de Janeiro. I was inspired and influenced by Japanese aesthetics tremendously. 4 years between the ages of 7 and 12, or 7 and 11, and I learned how to, I was trained in ikebana, flower arranging. Every week, a professional would come to our house and teach us, my mother and I, how to do ikebana. Now that's crazy, but in our school, in our elementary school, every year there was an annual ikebana contest. Can you believe it? Where all of the students in the school prepared a flower arrangement and laid them out on these long tables in the gymnasium, and they were given ribbons. So that was crazy. I also then joined the Boy Scouts and became an Indian dancer. And I was brought into the Explorer Scouts and given these huge wings. And I danced the Eagle Dance around the campfire at these jamborees. And I made a lot of the costume with bells on my feet, and the power of rising off the ground to the drums and lifting those wings in slow motion. I'll never forget that. But let's just get to the nitty gritty here. My most important influence was really Alexander Calder. And that's because he was a symbol of an artist who could do no wrong. I mean, he couldn't make anything without the Calder DNA in it, whether it was a drawing or whether it was a circus or whether it was a sculpture or a mobile or a painting, or everything looked like Calder. And his being was in everything he made. You recognize Calder. And that said to me, okay, he was being completely existentially true to himself, whether he knew it or not. He was completely focused. And when I opened Artware in 1977, my mission statement was basically any artist making jewelry who has that same DNA in their work is someone I'm interested in. And very often I would have every weekend on a Sunday, I had an open house. Anyone who wanted to show me their work to get into the gallery, if they arrived by noon, I would look at their work and give them a critique. And people would sometimes wait till 5 o'clock in the afternoon to get to see me. And I always looked for that Calder-esque imprint. Were they able to convey their soul in every piece that they did? And when I saw it, I grabbed them. And when I didn't see it, I would counsel them. And I would lead them and show them how, maybe where they hadn't focused yet enough. But if you look at people like Ted Mueling or Kara Croninger or Tuna Vigeland, everything they make carries that incredible kernel of their soul. And to me, that all came from my, discovering Calder.
I know you're now very engaged with your website. This is actually a question that this answer prompted in me. And I'm wondering if you have thought about an artware of the future?
Oh, I definitely have. I definitely have. As if any of you are interested, it's robertleemorrisgallery.com. And I only launched it like a month ago or 2 months ago. And there is an artware section, and everything that all the jewelry that I've purchased from my gallery artists, I have, and I'm showing on the site. And I'm also thinking of welcoming new people. Now, I'm afraid to say this because I don't want to be swamped with images, but the fact is there are so many people like John. I would love to be able to represent John somehow. I have this fatherly feeling. I've always had this paternal care and love for my fellow jewelry artist. And I have to say, when I was in the couture show, when I was making fine jewelry with gold and diamonds and platinum and Tahitian pearl, I would go to this, and I didn't have the same camaraderie with that world. It was too much about the material and not enough about the soul. And so I kind of eventually backed out of that. And I'm going back to the paternal thing of, yes, I think I might be restarting artware in some way. I just have to think about how it could be done. So yay.
So Mel, I wanted to ask you, because this discussion of soul and in certain kinds of materials, but perhaps not in others, yet so much of your book deals with what in a, I mean, nomenclature is a sticky thing, so we're not going to get, into the nomenclature war, but using fine or precious materials. And how do you see, because it would seem to me there are people who do capture that soul. Who do you see doing that? How do you see that being accomplished? I mean, we showed a number of works by artists whom I'm sure you feel do that, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are. And
I think it's a question of value and where we place the value. So for jewelry with precious materials, society and historically has tended to place the value on money, on the monetary value. And I argue in the book that we've got to move that away from the monetary value and place it on the art. Because if you say take a diamond and it's worth this much today, in 100 years' time, it could be completely worthless. And we're placing all of our value on something which has no long-term value. It's just something which a lot of people feel safe with because they understand a carat is this much. It's harder for people to say, right, art means this and it's worth that. So I think I would love to see jewelry move away from its obsession with monetary value and wealth. And also craftsmanship. I think it's important that we understand how things are made, but it's not the point. The point is it's a piece of art that moves us. It makes our lives better. Wearing a jewel is a piece of powerful sort of wealth, kind of like a signal of wealth. Obviously, it's part of what jewelry is for some people, and it's not a bad thing per se, but it's not, I think, the point. I think the point has to be art for it to continue and thrive as an idea.
Somebody whose work you show that combines, if you will, a variety of hierarchies of material would be, for example, Daniel Brush, whom we don't necessarily think of that way, but that Bakelite ring that is encrusted by gems or with gemstones, or actually to go to John's, the Verto piece that has the stones on it. So that sort of perhaps the material becomes a tool for the vision as opposed to the vision being the tool for the material. I don't know. But perhaps that's what.
if you were to take one of John's pieces or Daniel's pieces and wear it on the body, it's one thing. If you were to hang it up and in a gallery on the wall, it's something else. But actually, the thing itself is the same. Is us and our hierarchy. We assign it value, and I just disagree with the hierarchy. Why should a painting be worth more in social terms than something you wear on the body as sculpture? The whole book really is about dispensing with that and actually just looking at what something is to you. So I think Daniel's interesting. He started off, he works in multidisciplines. He does paper. He's a painter. He creates sculpture which you can wear. And he has said to me before, when he started making things you could wear, people were like, what is this jewelry? You're sort of taking away from yourself as an artist. And he's just like, I'm just going to express myself in any way I choose, because that's my right. And so there's a definite snobbery and against, within the hierarchy of art, jewelry for some reason is sort of languishing in a place which I just don't agree with, but we don't help ourselves by talking about carat weight and grams of gold. And we don't help ourselves at all by doing that. We are partly to blame, because we still talk about it in a way which takes away from the art.
I think moving jewelry front and center is really important. And in 1998, we did a conference trying to, the division goes so far that, for example, people in decorative arts separate still, although less, jewelry from, if you will, that category. And one of the things that we've always striven to do is to create a cross-category view, and not to define things in conventional terms, so within that way of looking at things, jewelry should be front and center for what it can do and what it does. And also maybe we free it from some of our expectations that it, as you said before, must always be worn, or or some of the things that you do, Robert, where with challenging that the thing that I misspoke and said was for the hair, but it's for the arm. And John, of course, your work, which I was going to say stands alone, except it's on that figure behind, but it's phenomenally sculptural without being on a person. I'm wondering if you have a preferred form or something that you feel is the most versatile form for artistic expression in jewelry. So be it a brooch or earrings or necklace. And Melanie, what do you think about that?
Well, I always think earrings are for other people. And things I can see, like a cuff or a ring, are for me. And, we're talking about raising your frequency. I love every time I wear something brilliant and I look at it, it's almost like a shot in the arm of pleasure. And so I think, I wear jewelry for me. I don't really wear it for other people, though it's nice to have a reaction, but I don't mind if there is no reaction. For me, it's like, it's first in my life before I put any clothes on. The jewelry is first. It speaks my voice in the world. So for me, it's a ring and a cuff, which I find wonderful because I can see them. And then I do love a big necklace. And earrings, I like earrings, but I just find they're really not for the wearer, really. So that's how I
question, which is if you're sort of looking at in a sense, the form is a canvas, if you will. What do you think about the brooch?
Well, the brooch is historically probably one of the most important forms. It has been political. I think Elizabeth I, would take the brooch and people would wear brooches dedicated to her, during wars. And, it is actually a sort of a form of politics, the brooch. Madeleine Albright as well. People communicate with brooches. And they kind of fell out of fashion, for a time. In recent years, they've come back. But like my grandma would always kind of like wear a brooch. I probably haven't worn one. I collect brooches, but I don't wear them, And so I think the brooch has become almost like this mouthpiece for the political ideas of jewelry, which actually is quite important. But we don't wear them as much as we used to because we're just not as formal as we used to be. We don't wear hats. We were talking about this earlier. We don't wear hats. We don't wear sort of pins to, we used to wear brooches to pin capes. We don't wear a lot of the things that brooches were there to hold on to. So I'd love to see a return of the brooch, a serious return. I'd love to see men wear brooches.
Can I interject?
Please.
Here. I have always had a problem with brooches. And that's because I always think of jewelry as something that is for the body and that it works with the body. And that's the challenge I always have, is how to take something, an idea, and make it wearable and comfortable. And a brooch to me, and I've done so many of them, is more like it's like an object. It's like a piece of art, more like a piece of art or a sculpture than a piece of jewelry, because you're not challenged with how to wear it so much. You just put it on. You just use the pin, put it on, and that's it. It doesn't have to bend. It doesn't have to move. It doesn't have to be articulated. So it sits in its own realm. And I think it tends to have more power in that in the world of art, because it doesn't have that jewelry attachment the way necklaces or especially earrings do. And so when I was doing brooch after brooch after brooch, it was primarily with Donna Karan, and it was, we were doing fall collections with big coats and heavy wool, and those pins, I mean, I had huge pins, and they would be dwarfed by the fabric. And so it was important that I had something, that had the look of Donna Karan, that it looked voluptuous and sensuous and soft and curvy, which was also me. So that was a perfect collaboration. But also that accentuated the spirit of that collection. It was like the element that said, this collection is about this, or this collection's about that. And that's where the jewelry, whether it was a buckle or a pin, it really became how to encapsulate the whole idea of the collection with an element, with a symbol, with a shape. And that was, to me, one of the most challenging things. I did 36 collections with her. 36 collections. I had to come up with something new every time and still have it look like her and me. So
but
that's why
the brooch is interesting, because it doesn't touch the skin. Because it doesn't touch the skin, it just feels different to anything else.
Exactly. So that's my interjection.
So John, what about you in preferred form?
I was thinking about this. It's almost a bit like, what's your favorite color? Because I've made collections, different collections, where the earrings have been the main event, just because the style of the form that I was creating lent itself the best to being in space with air around it. So they were, in fact, there's a pair here. So they're kind of, they're visible 360 degrees, and they need to hang in midair to sort of swing around. And then I used the same elements and translated them into other pieces, necklaces and bracelets, and it just didn't quite work as well. So I was just like, oh my God, earrings are my favorite thing. But then I made other collections where it didn't lend itself to an earring, and it was all about the necklace or the bracelet. So, and also I think the way you combine it, the way what you wear things with, I can't really say. Although at the moment I'm on a bit of a necklace kind of thing, yeah. Which I think if I had to choose, I'd say necklaces and earrings, because because they draw attention to the face and the eyes, and that's where everything's happening in my mind.
I haven't seen any pictures of your bracelets. Do you have
Well,
some?
I've hardly done any, really. That's why.
I have
Um,
one image of a bracelet he's done. I can send you.
Okay.
I guess with necklaces and earrings, the durability of the thing is less of an issue because it's not going to get beaten up like a bracelet or a ring. And there's a kind of a delicacy in the pieces that I make, which is, I'm not saying it's going to fall apart at any time. It's not, but like it's I mean, there's a lot of thin air going on in these pieces,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they just lend themselves better to being necklaces at the moment.
That's interesting that your materials and your forms are completely free with the necklace and the earrings, because there's very little anything getting in its way, except, but a bracelet does and a ring take punishment. So
Yeah.
we'll see what you come up with. I can't wait to see
Yeah.
if you can solve this problem.
Yeah,
So-
watch the space.
Before we get to some questions, I wanted to close with this question, which is, how do you differentiate, if you differentiate, between art and craft?
Are you who are you asking?
Well, it seems like you would like to answer.
Oh gosh. This is a really big question. I think you need a separate webinar for this.
Well, exactly, and I have to come back as Banana Girl. It's a persona we have invented for me,
Yes.
so I promise to do so. part
you
two.
could wear that with it. That'll go.
Perfect.
I guess, I don't know, I really thought about this, and it kind of relates back to a comment I made earlier about words being quite reductive and they just don't really say enough. And I think there's all the, there's spectrums and sliding scales of everything. And I think craft and art are always present, but in varying degrees. And it's a tough one because I guess if I was to say, I would say craft is the act of producing the thing. It's the process, and the art is more the idea. If I was to reduce it down, I've felt judged in the past for not being an artist and for being a designer or a craftsperson, which was very frustrating because I felt inside in my heart that I was an artist. But I wasn't getting that kind of critique from people. It was just being just being sort of overlooked a little bit as somehow void of any kind of thought or idea. It was just a pretty object. So I'm sort of, having gone through that experience of feeling misunderstood, I'm quite hesitant to cast judgment onto other things, because I think we need to take into account what the intentions of the maker are and the object that they're making. Is it successful in achieving its own specific goals? Is it well made? What's the idea? How about you, Robert and Melanie?
Well, craft to me is, like you say, it is the actual making. It's the process of the making, and that takes a lot of skill. You don't have to be an artist to be a maker. Imagine the making of bamboo objects. Everything that's created with bamboo is fascinating. And I used to love watching people make things. I would almost start drooling when I would be on the subway watching someone crocheting. The act of making the thing, of her doing the knit one, purl two, whatever it's called, I would just become hypnotized by watching someone making something with their hands. It happens to me all the time. But that's not the art. For me, the art is the intention or the energy that's coming down, that you're downloading, it's coming through you, and through your craftsmanship, you're able to let that energy come out. And I don't think that someone who's learning someone who's just weaving baskets to sell for $10 a piece is really working on any kind of artistic challenge. They're making baskets, and we need baskets. Like we need toothbrushes and we need soap. So you have to learn how to make soap. So that's a craft. These are all great crafts, coffee cups, ceramics. But when you take it to the next step, where you infuse it with your soul and with your personality and with your message that you're getting, that you want to materialize, that's when the art starts to come alive. And I think it's pretty easy for anybody to tell the difference between a craft object that is kind of just made for useful purposes and one that is filled with artistic intent. You know,
Yeah.
it's just,
Hang on.
it's the language that we don't need to speak it. We just see it and we feel it and we understand it.
John, it's interesting though, your work is meticulously crafted, and I do not use that word disparagingly at all. And so I wonder what the three of you think about the relationship between the realization of vision and its crafting in order to manifest it. How, you know, for example, Mel, when you're looking at somebody's work, what's the play of those two things in your calculus?
Well, it's an interesting debate within the jewelry kind of sphere. You know, some people find if they make their own stuff, they think that's more important than not making their own stuff. I would say, I mean, art is the expression of consciousness and craft is the application of art.
Yeah.
So we've got that kind of out of the way. You know, art is wild. Craft goes by rules. You know, you have to make things in certain ways. And so they are quite separate. And I think we get confused sometimes in the industry about talking about the same thing. You know, John makes his work as well as comes up with the vision. But if John didn't make his work for me would be just as good. So I personally judge the end result more than how it came to be. And it's a bit like, you know, Da Vinci used kind of like oil paints. We don't talk about how he ground the pigments to make those paints. We just talk about the art. And I would love us to do, you know, I think we get a bit bogged down in the craft sometimes. It's important, but it isn't the thing for me. So I just think I judge the end result. I don't mind if a computer made it. I don't mind if a person made it. I don't mind if the artist made it themselves. If I see it, if I see that necklace behind John and it blows my socks off, for me, that's the important thing.
Can I interject?
Yes, please.
Actually, these two pieces are quite good examples. So this one, it's silver discs, which have been cut using wire erosion. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's essentially using sparks between, or like a piece of wire that's passing through the metal at high speed, and it erodes the metal away. And I did that because I wanted to get this like real machined kind of aesthetic regularity throughout the piece, which if there was one piece which was a little bit off, you'd notice it. Your eye would zoom in on that, and it needed to have this kind of like this fluidity. This piece I made during lockdown last year, and all those services were inaccessible. Everything had closed. And I only had this one exhibition that hadn't been cancelled, and this piece is for that, which is still being postponed and postponed. This is all hand cut, which was a real test of my abilities, because again, it needed to have that regularity. But what I ended up doing was ruining my wrist. So, and now I can't, you know, I've had to take lots of time out because I've overdone it with too much work. So I wouldn't hesitate to have the pieces laser cut if I was to repeat that piece and in future pieces. I mean, there's always going to be a combination of industrial processes with, you know, handcrafting. you know, when something comes out of a 3D printer, it still needs to be finished by hand. It doesn't come out immaculate. Or when a piece of jewelry is cast, you know, there's masses of work needs to be done to get that piece of metal looking nice. So yeah, I agree with you, Mel. I think it's more important, and it's becoming increasingly important for me now to just to make it in whatever way is necessary, and to follow the path of least resistance, I guess, in achieving that. But like, if it's really important to you in that moment that this thing is handmade and it's hit with a hammer, and it's got, like with your work, Robert, it's got those marks in it, which are the evidence of your actual hands and your hammer, then that's what you must do. It all depends on what you're talking about. I think you have to treat each object as a case in itself.
Technology doesn't necessarily obviate craft. It's another it's right. I mean, it's a process, it's a tool, it's, you know, it's another way of fabrication, if you will, realization.
Yeah.
And
I want to say something that's very important to me, which is about the making, the act of making. And I used to lecture about this often when I would do annual trips to schools to do lectures and seminars, that in the shamanic terms in history, the blacksmith, the metal worker, the man who would transmute ore into swords or shields, was seen as a magician. They were seen as someone who could transmute coins into jewelry, or coins into flatware back into coins. So this was something that the skill that the maker had. But then when you get into the actual making of a sword, for example, this is a very romantic image I've always had, is that as you are going through the forge and you've got that fire going and you've got the bellows and you bring the metal out and you start to hammer it, what you're doing is you're consciously hammering, forging into that sword a message or a spirit or whatever is coming through you. And so this is where you get the idea of the magical sword, the sword or the shield that has the life force of the maker. And when you talk about the hammer marks, yes, I remember when I took a class at Haystack in Maine to learn blacksmithing. It was the only class I've ever had related to jewelry making at all. And I went berserk. I loved the whole process of melting the metal, getting it so it was red molten hot, and into the shape and I lost consciousness. I literally was one with the process. I was simply a tool that was being driven by some other force to create these pieces. And now when I hold them up, I can feel that passion that I had. Because I then came back to New York with these new skills, and I worked entirely with fine silver, thick, round, like 4-gauge rod. And I would hammer the daylights out of these things and watch them bend and turn. And when I would get to the point that when I achieved where I wanted to go, I would hold the thing in my hand and feel like, oh my God, it's glowing. It has a glow to it. And that's what you get when you have a one-of-a-kind handmade piece by someone who is both a craftsman and an artist. And so that means those jewelry students, those jewelry makers, you're part of a tribe, you're part of a long line of magicians. And if you think of yourself as that, and you think of yourself as a person who has this ability to transmute materials into something magical, then you've got that's a key to a very happy life, I think.
Do you think it's do you not think it's possible to imbue an object with the same degree of sort of magic and of power just through
Oh, yes.
actual having the idea itself. I mean, I'm totally with you on, you know, the hands in the clay kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
idea of like this very intimate relationship you have with the
It's
object.
just that I think that jewelry people should be able to experience that feeling of making something with their own hands. And then when it becomes practical or impractical, you then move into other ways of making things. I mean, I didn't even know that casting was an event, was something I could do. I was making everything with sheet and wire construction, hammering everything into sandbags, one of a kind pieces, until someone said, well, I'd like to order 20 of these. And I went, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then someone said, you know, you could make a mold. And I went, oh my, thank God. And that's how my business grew. But until then, you know, I hold on to these one of a kind pieces. They are so valuable to me. But it's part of the process of becoming a full blown artist and maker.
So I'm going to turn to some of the questions that we've received for the remaining time and say that I so look forward to part 2 of this absolutely riveting conversation. And the first question I'm going to ask to Melanie is from Leslie Higgins. What can jewelry styles, techniques, and materials tell us about society and conventional norms at a given time?
Yeah, I think jewelry tends to act as a kind of snapshot of an era as well. So as well as an art movement, you know, you have eras which are reflected. You know, I've collected jewelry for a long time. When I look back at my sort of goth teenage years, you know, the things I wore then, I wouldn't wear probably in the same way now because I'm different now. So I definitely think as a person who wears jewelry, there are eras of my life which are represented by the things I bought at the time. So, you know, and eras, as we said before, are only really completely obvious 10, 20, 30 years later. So I would say they are like a mirror to who we are at any given time, like frozen in time, frozen in a kind of a sculpture. And I think that's important for us to see who we actually are in retrospect. But of course, then I would argue that the best jewelry is timeless. Like the pieces we're talking about here today, you know, in 100 years, 200 years time, will look exactly current. And I think as much as it's valuable to have something, you can see it's from the 1920s. The jewelry that I like the most is just absolutely, you know, when you go back to some museums and you look at pieces which are sort of from the 1200 BC, they look like they were made yesterday. And that, for me, is kind of why jewelry has survived since, for 40,000 years.
So here's another question. Whichever one of you would like to answer, which is, what are the latest trends?
Oh.
Okay.
No, I don't know what they are. I don't care what they are. It's not what I do.
I would say it doesn't matter actually what trends are, because great design goes beyond any trend. Trend is a marketing idea to sell product. We're not in the business of product here. So it's not really relevant to this conversation. If you're going to make fine jewelry, en masse and sell it like for Valentine's Day, that's when you talk about trends. But we're kind of talking about, unique pieces of art, really. So it doesn't really, I think, I don't want to be sort of funny about it. It doesn't really apply to what we're talking about here, really.
Okay. How would you define successful design, John? And these are questions that have come in. So
yeah.
Excuse me for not having attributed the last one. This is Miss Michelle Schneider.
Successful design. Gosh. That's a really hard one.
I have an idea, and then John.
You've got an idea, Mel?
Yeah.
Well, I think for me, I can only speak from my own experience, obviously. But for me, a successful piece of design that I've created is one that I'm really happy with and gives me that real sense of achievement. It has balance, it has shape, and where it feels like it's in harmony within itself, but also in harmony with the body once it's worn. Yeah, I'm not so good with things that kind of like jar, and that's, for me, that's my idea of successful design. It's about harmony. Yeah. Is that okay?
Sure. Melanie?
I think successful design changes our perception of design. Like, I'm always looking for things that shift design. Like what I think an earring is, and I see something and it totally changes my perception of what that can be. For me, that's successful. You know, some of the pieces that we're talking about today with both Robert and John, they've changed my perception of what jewelry can be. And that for me is success. You totally and utterly change the conversation.
My favorite piece that is, I consider my most successful piece ever, is my knuckle ring. And that is because it's a perfect marriage between form and function. And the form is about the function. They're the same. And when you put one on your finger and you realize that you can literally move your hand, it's comfortable, then it's even more successful, because it's not just an idea, it actually works and is comfortable. And it also has longevity. I remember first making them in 1976. And they are still, I can't even find any to sell anymore, but I've got a long list of people wanting them. And not from Mexico.
I would like one too, please.
I'm actually gonna start producing silver knuckle rings again, because and gold ones. Because one woman told me a story. She was wearing a 22 karat gold large knuckle ring, got her hand caught in the car door, and it was the ring that saved her finger from being cut off. So I've always thought, wow, that was a really good design. Successful, yeah.
And maybe the power of gold.
And the power of gold. Of course, 22 karat is so soft.
Indeed. So from Deborah Kuznets, is jewelry considered fine if it's manufactured and not made by hand, and there are 1,000 pieces of the same necklace?
Mel.
Yes. Because as we've been saying, it's not about how it's made, it's about what it is. So yes, fine jewelry, I mean, like, we get into this argument about what fine jewelry is. You know, it's something which tends to be considered to be a precious thing. It doesn't have to be precious material, but it's considered to be a precious thing. And it's different to costume, which is, well, costume obviously tends to be made out of unprecious materials in our minds. But the whole idea of what fine costume and high jewelry is, I think, is merging. I'm not sure we have really hard boundaries anymore between those ideas.
Yeah, I noticed in your book you had an example of a bronze piece. I don't remember, but I was surprised to see it included in your book. I was pleased to see it in there, because everything was so highbrow. So, and I wasn't even familiar with the term high jewelry. So now I understand.
It's become quite political.
Yeah.
Like, some people have contacted me saying, I don't like that term. And I'm like, well, I think you have to differentiate something which is a mass market produced thing with something which is like a one-off piece. And, you know, it's just an easier way to describe it. But essentially it's all, you know, it's all artistic if we agree it's artistic. So it's very nice, Lisa. In fact, you're changing mid-conversation there. But yeah, I think that terms themselves can be quite divisive at times.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately it's a feeling, you know. Is
Well,
it
I'm fascinated
a
by this
unique-
fine. I'm sorry. I'm fascinated. I mean, you've opened my eyes to a whole new concept. High jewelry was like, wow, I love that idea. I mean, maybe I can make something that's considered high jewelry too. I
I
mean,
definitely think
New designs.
have. Yeah.
So,
oh, Lisa, nice combination.
oh yes, well, I wanted to, one of the quotes that I found and then I lost and I searched madly for was actually Robert's statement. The necklace is the anchor. It's the classification of jewelry that says what the whole idea is about. Now, of course, having said that his ideal piece is the knuckle ring, but I sort of wanted to do a little bit of service to that statement. Here is Haley Norton asking, what does jewelry as a form of expression say about the wearer today? Is there any, I think she means difference from expressions in the past, or is the function essentially the same?
I think it's the same. I mean, the fact that we are all changing our lives and we're communicating via Zoom and everybody's getting these shots of us. I mean, we're all basically beauty shots now. We're head and chest, which would be in the fashion world, that'd be considered a beauty shot. And so I would think that there's a new concentration on such things as jewelry that goes around the head area. So that to me is a change that may be coming due to our socio-political climate.
Yeah, also you have, I mean, early on, as you pointed out, you have, for example, the piece of jewelry, if you will, that might hold the two pieces of cloth together. So it's possible that, pardon?
Sorry, I would also argue that if you go back into ancient history, we wore flowers in our hair and shells on our body because even then we wanted to, you know, adorn, for want of a better word, ourselves. And what has happened is since we've been able to mine gold and mine stones, those flowers and shells have become precious metals and precious stones. So the actual original purpose was to stand out, express our taste, even in the caves, and to be different, to be individual. And I don't think that's changed at all.
No, well, that impulse, I think, is, you know, you see that, I mean, that's pre-recorded history, if you will, the impulse to adorn, to, pardon the word, but to differentiate and express the self, and to actually use materials that are viewed as effective in so doing. So
think about the hunter who comes back with the slain tiger, and after they butcher it, they take the claws and the teeth and they distribute them among the hunters and they wear them somehow as a symbol of power, because this is a lion's claw. There's nothing more powerful than a lion's claw. And it says who you are, what you've earned, what your position is in the society. And it is a talisman. Amulets and talismans go right to the beginning of mankind.
right, the talismanic value of the object, which relates to embellishing or decorating or what have you the self, but it's also transference of
Power.
significance and power, etc., or faith onto another thing, or viewing it as an extension of those views and beliefs. And actually we see that coming back today. So for example, Muse, which does a lot of collaborations with pendants and charms and things, and the resurgence in certain forms that are attached to being expression, wow, this is solipsistic, but expressions of significance, somehow conveyors of meaning, either the narrative and the talismanic.
Can I add to that as well? I think
Please.
also there's just so much choice now, and because of social media, maybe, and the internet, it might, whereas you might have geographically, you know, certain trends or certain groups of people who tend to wear certain types of jewelry or have a certain type of tattoo or the location of the tattoo, it's kind of like become much more fluid now, because there's just so much choice out there. And I think for me personally, I've gone through a realization that I don't have to conform to the kinds of styles or you know, that other jewelry might follow, and that actually we just have absolute freedom to do whatever we want, and we can invent ourselves in whichever way we want and wear whatever we want, and it's really wonderful.
So I'm going to take the liberty of flowing over with these questions here, and then what I promise is that those questions we have not gotten to, because I understand there's still more in the queue, you will get answers, but hopefully we can come together and have another conversation like this, and take this as a point of departure, if you will, for that higher vibration. So the next question is actually for Robert. Artware was an innovative concept for a store. Can you discuss where the idea came from and starting the business?
Well, yes, the idea came from Sculpture to Wear. Sculpture to Wear was the original artist jewelry gallery in America. It was started by Joan Sonnabend, who owned the Plaza Hotel and the Sonesta Corporation, and she was a major art dealer. And she was fascinated with artist jewelry, and it was there that she had jewelry by all the big names: Picasso, Braque, Arp, Man Ray, on and on and on. And it was a revelation to me to think that, oh my goodness, these guys are making jewelry that looks just like all their other work. And so, like Calder. And that became my incentive. And they closed Sculpture to Wear. Well, they sold the Plaza Hotel and they decided to close Sculpture to Wear instead of reopening somewhere. And I was on the street looking. I had nowhere to go. I'd already had a cover on Vogue. And at that, like 3 months later, they decided they needed to close because they weren't selling enough to make it worthwhile opening again. So I was pushed into I had no alternative. And as an entrepreneur, you take a risk at the right time. And that's what I did. I decided that Artware would be my furthering the concept of Sculpture to Wear, but not with dead artists, but with living artists whose primary concern was art that you wore on your body. And I was one of the few people in the country doing that kind of thing. There was Julie Artisans on Madison Avenue, who also was fantastic with that, but it was more about clothing. And Artware became a legendary place because I was able to pour into Artware everything that had inspired me all my life, anthropologically, culturally, and the displays that I used were inspired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Those tall, like in the Egyptian wing, you just walk down the hall and you see these tall wall cases with vignettes inside, with actual scenes of Egyptian mummies, or not mummies, but people doing things. And I thought, this is how I want to show the jewelry. And I built vertical cases and presented jewelry in a way that was not shown. It usually was shown in jewelry cases. You look down at it, I was making it into a lifestyle. I would bring branches, I would bring slabs of stone, I would bring Kiva ladders from the Southwest. And I would create these tall vertical, and people would come in and be transformed or transported to other worlds like you are when you go through the Museum of Natural History, dioramas. And that's was the primary. And then of course, don't forget the body casts. The body casts were my main, that was what made Artware even more unique. And those body casts are still as gorgeous today because we're just a human body. You never grow tired of looking at these body casts. So it was a wonderful, wonderful combination of everything I'd learned in my life and then a starting off point to grow my life further from there. That's a big answer, but I hope it helped.
Well, so as a final question, this is actually one that's directed at Robert, but I think it's actually a good question for each of you. Because what it talks about is the relationship, if you will, between design and what we were in a sense speaking about before, the zeitgeist or social shifts. And so I'm going to ask it of you, Robert, but then I'm going to turn to you, John and Melanie, for your thoughts, because the question is situated in the 70s and the 80s. So, Robert, do you think that your powerful designs that had the feeling of armor and were very bold tapped into the feminist movement that had come into being in the 70s? Your pieces then provided strong statements for women in the 80s who were in senior corporate positions for the first time. And this, Deborah Carlston goes on to suggest that many of your sculptural pieces were a reflection of changes in society during those very important times. Would you agree?
I agree. I agree. Of course, you're not immune to hearing everything that's going on in the world. So I subconsciously was aware of the always of the women's movement, but of the power of women. And I love comic books. So I was into Wonder Woman from my whole life, the whole idea of these Amazonian women who were incredible heroic warriors. And so I was dressing them, and that carried over into the fashion magazines. The editors loved that I was making big cuffs for them, big collars, and that they were making my armor-like work with their fashion pages. And so that just proceeded to evolve into this very pro-woman with Donna Karan and Calvin, but mostly with Donna, because she created this vision of the working girl, the working woman, and the big shoulders. And, you know, the woman president, Donna Karan is president. And then, of course, Oprah Winfrey, and every single female anchor on the news channels were wearing my jewelry because it was a symbol of what Donna was projecting, which was the strength of the feminine. So that's really, yes.
So, John, I'm wondering, now that we're having images coming down from Mars, and we are extending our vision in perhaps ways unimaginable, how perhaps that might relate to some of your work, where I see, if you will, flight and feathers, expansion, vision, but that's just me. But I wonder if you see your work as somehow related to the period in which you are working.
It's an interesting question. And I guess it kind of refers back to what Mel was saying earlier about how we define movements and art, and that it can't really happen until you've got hindsight on it. I've always kind of been quite private in the way that I live and the work that I make, and it it's kind of, it's not that I exist in a vacuum, because I think you can't help but be influenced by what's going on around you somehow. It might even be that it's almost like sometimes ideas are almost like in the wave, in sort of waves, and you're sort of picking them up, and maybe multiple people are having the same ideas at the same time. The fact I can use a computer to help me design my work now is an influence, as is the the fact I can laser cut sheet material instead of hand cutting it. So there's all those sort of like practical things that are influencing what I can and can't make. I guess so. If I existed in another era of the past, it's like, would I still be making the same things? And I'd like to think I would. I'd find a way to do it, because for me, it's about tapping into that absolute source of who I am, and it's like this universal kind of consciousness, and I think we are all expressions of that consciousness, as is nature and everything around us. So it's kind of, it's a tricky one to, I don't really know is the answer. I think that's for someone else to observe about me in 30 years time. I'm just going to let them deal with it, and I'm just going to get on with making it.
Mel and I will be there.
Okay, yeah, feel free.
But I'd like to ask you, Melanie, as finally, because it's kind of one of the dualities you touch on, the individual vision of the artist, at the same time, the relationship of the artist to and the changes in jewelry as a result of the times within which, as a result of any particular period.
Well, I was going to go back to the question about the women's movement, because I think Robert is a great advocate of power, powerful women wearing powerful jewelry. And in chapter 5, I look at feminism, and I look at, the history behind it. Essentially, after the Second World War, women were in jobs they had never done before. And when the war finished, they became more educated, they had fewer children, they had a disposable income really for the first time in the West. And they went into careers, they went into the city, and they went into male-dominated, the sort of the corporate jungle. And, jewelry was an armor, because you were fighting every day just to have a voice. I spoke to somebody recently who said, when she was at work in the 80s, she wasn't allowed to wear trousers. The dress code was a skirt. I can't imagine a time where my boss says to me, you can't wear what you want to wear. But it was, quite recent. And so with that, women who had more money to spend were buying and asking for much bigger, more powerful jewelry. And we've seen that escalate over the last couple of sort of decades as women, run their own businesses and actually have much more money to spend. And, obviously I do a lot of things with economics, and, I look at the figures, and women are now spending quite a lot, in a very short space of time, because they can. So I would say that jewelry has become more powerful because women have become more powerful in society, and women are now a force. And on the flip side, because some women now have more power, men feel they can be more decorative. A lot of men now are wearing jewelry, being much more expressive with what they wear, because they don't have to be like this sort of authoritative sort of grey figure. They can actually now become much more expressive. So I'm definitely seeing an interplay of masculinity and femininity, which is actually quite lovely to watch. And I think it's only going to increase as society carries on in that vein.
Agreed. And I think the whole, first off, if you will, jewelry for gentlemen, and jewelry that isn't genderized, if you will, all of these questions. Pardon?
And that's a big interesting thing. Like a lot of jewelry now, that even very complex jewelry is gender neutral. Men are wearing things. Boucheron just come out with a collection which is kind of gender neutral, very large, quite ornate jewelry, which you know, the models are sort of quite androgynous. Some people aren't, it's not for everyone, but I like the fact that there's this democracy. You know, why should we get all the best jewelry? Why shouldn't everyone have the option to wear a tiara or, you know, one of John's necklaces? Who's to say that men shouldn't wear those?
Well, I think this is a fabulous focus for a next subject, and perhaps also some musings about creations to be made, in addition to texts to be written. I have the very happy responsibility of saying thank you to the three of you who have been absolutely fantastic to talk with. Robert Lee Morris, John Moore, and Melanie Grant. In our follow-up email, we will be conveying to you a coupon code for Melanie's book that Phaidon has made available, and I encourage you to read it. It is fantastic and very thought-provoking, as is Robert's book. And I feel thrilled to have been part of this conversation, which is one that I had sort of conjured in my head for a very long time. And the both generational aspects and the eternality, as well as Mel, how you play with so many factors that impact, you know, everything that's simple is the result of such complexity, and we just aren't aware of it. So I'm very grateful, and I so look forward to all that is to come. And I thank you all for joining us. We're sorry that we ran over a bit, but it was very compelling. And we will be announcing our next program, which is to take place on March 17th. So stay tuned. And in the meanwhile, please be well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was fun. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
It was